Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, the most recent chapter of My Hero Academia, in my opinion, was one of those chapters that was a masterclass on exposition. Horikoshi was able to depict exactly what he wanted to depict and not make too many unnecessary moves. You could tell from the way that this chapter was written that he's had this idea of the reveal in his head for years. And I feel like this is one of those chapters where we really have to have a keen eye and really pay attention to how Horikoshi is depicting his characters. Because while the dialogue between characters is intense and fast-paced, you have to pay attention to what's actually going on and looking at the scene itself. Because Horikoshi's been setting up things right in front of us without us really even knowing. The concept of the UA Traitor was something so hotly debated that for a while people started thinking that it was a plotline that Horikoshi just up and forgot about. And for spoilers' sake, that's about as much as I'm going to go into it during the intro. But if you haven't read the most recent chapter, you are seriously missing out. So make sure you read it and then head on back and grab yourself a drink. Because at the end of this one, I'm going to be throwing out some ideas as to what I think might happen in chapter 338. Now let's go inside. I'm freezing my screen off. Welcome to the bar, folks. Okay, so the most recent chapter of My Hero Academia has Aoyama breaking down in tears in front of Deku and admitting that yes, he is the person that has given away every single detail that has told the villains where the heroes are. And I gotta say that Aoyama being revealed as the UA Traitor is the biggest piece of irony that this story has slapped us in the face with. He's the sole individual in Class 1A, besides the main character of the series, that has a quirk that has adverse reactions on his body. Yes, we've seen people use their quirks and hurt themselves, but we have never seen somebody use their quirk and shit their pants. And look, to those that kind of put two and two together and realized, okay, if this guy's quirk doesn't really fit his body, that means that his quirk wasn't meant for his body, and who do we know that could give people quirks? You know, bam, all for one. Me, on the other hand, I was sold that the Invisible Girl was the traitor, and what we got in this chapter was confirmation of what I said in my previous video of her liking Aoyama, and on top of that, we got to see her face. And on that note, let's just head over to the wall and talk about this a little bit more. Alright, so I know it's not the most pivotal scene of the chapter, but in my opinion, one of the biggest reveals is the reveal of the Invisible Girl's face. It's safe to say that Toru is a character that struggles with self-image. The way that she's revealed, it's almost in a way that, you see that she's actually self-conscious to really show herself, but she wants to show how much emotion she's feeling right now. Rightfully so, because this is the biggest betrayal of trust that any student of Class 1A is incurring. It's sorry to sidetrack real quick, but you know for a fact that this asshole Monoma is definitely gonna make a comment about the one traitor being in Class 1A. And really, the big question that I'm asking is, why are we assuming that Aoyama is the only traitor residing within UA at this time? All For One said in the beginning of the chapter that he literally doesn't care when his assets get captured. He just thinks of them as disposable tools, and once that tool's purpose is done, he throws it away and just finds a new one. All For One is constantly scheming, so I wouldn't be surprised if he already has a contingency if Aoyama betrays him. But my favorite part of the chapter, hands down, was after the forest scene, when they gather Aoyama's parents and Aoyama and bring him back to UA. And remember what I said earlier, this was one of those chapters that you really need to pay attention to the aesthetics of what's going on in the panel itself. Because when they go back to UA and use what looks like an assembly room as their holding cell for Aoyama and his family, we see that the two people that look the most visibly distraught are the Invisible Girl and his other teammate, Mina. Also, shout out to Todoroki for being the one person to say no, absolutely not when Nezu asks for the room. And I think that it's because Todoroki is smart enough to know that if Class 1A leaves the room, there's gonna be some good cop, bad cop going on, and they don't want their friend to, get strong-armed like that. And the biggest fact of the matter is, they're classmates, they're friends, they deserve to know the truth. They don't deserve to get the, oh, your kids, stay out of the situation spiel. But I do think one of the most pivotal points of this chapter is when they say, no, we're not going and they steal the conversation away from the adults, and then they start interrogating Aoyama. Because what they do is start asking the right questions. They get a vague explanation out of the parents as to what the consequences might be for betraying All for One. And the biggest thing that Deku takes away from this situation is that he needs to save the soul of his friend. Because the entire time, Aoyama is teetering on whether or not eventually he's gonna have to embrace the role of a full-blown villain. Though with the reveal of him being the traitor, now the possibility occurs where everyone in Class 1A, Deku included, can help claw him back from the clutches of All for One. While subtly, when you pay attention, you see that Bakugo is like, wait a minute, for a second, what is he doing? And then he realizes that Deku is trying to use Aoyama to get a one-up on All for One. But at the same time, we the reader understand that Deku is also doing this from the kindness of his heart. He doesn't want to see another person manipulated like Lady Nagant was. Also, a huge growing point for our hero is him understanding that one bad thing doesn't justify you for the rest of your life. That was the benefit of him facing off against villains like Gentle. He was able to develop that personality of people aren't defined by their initial action. They will be defined by their actions if they continue going in that certain direction, but he sees an opportunity to pull Aoyama back from the dark side, and that's what he's going to try to do. And what Deku is showing him is exactly what Class 1A showed Deku. It's that he doesn't have to take on this whole burden by himself. Yes, you will be betraying the biggest bad in the series, and your entire family could possibly be in jeopardy. But I wouldn't be surprised now if Aoyama sacrifices his quirk to do something and save Deku. But also, even though this might be one of the smallest wins that the heroes can get, turning Aoyama against All for One and having him work for All for One but also working for the heroes, that is a huge asset to have. But like I said, pretty much Deku's plan relies on the fact that there is no more traitors in UA, period. If Class 1B has a traitor amongst them, it's only a matter of time before everyone finds out that Aoyama was the traitor and the information gets back to All for One, and then All for One enacts his plan to make sure to cut Aoyama out of his plan and also destroy his asset. Because if there's one thing to take away from the reveal of Aoyama being the UA traitor, it's to take it and look at it as a person that's just casually living inside of UA and using it as your day-to-day refuge. Try to look at it from that perspective. Imagine if you're one of the many civilians using UA as their refuge and you find out that there's a traitor living under the same roof as you. Not only are you going to be pissed off at the fact that the heroes are once again withholding crucial information from you, at that point, if you're using UA as your shelter, you have to start wondering what else they're hiding from you. Yes, it's totally possible that Deku and the rest of them keep this under wraps, and if they do keep this under wraps, that only furthers the possibility that this might get blown up out of proportion and then everybody finds out and then has further disdain for heroes. Because then that lie of omission becomes a huge lie that blows up in the heroes' faces, and then once again they're stuck with that controversy of, can we even trust you? The reveal of Aoyama being the UA traitor is such a linchpin that can turn the tide in the heroes' favor if everything pans out in the right direction. Because if in chapter 338, if it turns out that Aoyama decides to work as a spy for the heroes against All for One, that is pretty nuts. Because in a way, all you have to do is be like, yeah, I'm gonna set them up in this situation, and all the heroes have to do is make it look like they got trapped when in essence they have the jump on All for One. Also, it's fun to go back and read certain chapters where you know that the teachers are withholding information because they know that there might be the traitor amongst them. Like for instance, when the war arc was first starting out and we had the mansion raid and the hospital raid, the students had zero idea what was going on. A lot of them thought that they were just going to an exercise, and then it evolved into something like this. That alone should spread distrust amongst the people that are just attending the hero school. It shows that even the people conducting this raid had such distrust within themselves that they couldn't even provide the accurate amount of information for the people actually going to attend this event. This war resulted in tons of different casualties. It resulted in the retirement of several different heroes. So the fact of the matter is, you could have had just some simple hero that shows up and then all of a sudden realizes that this is a huge operation, and then the next thing they know, they're getting turned to dust. And to be quite honest, to kind of backtrack here, it brings me back to the scene where Todoroki is like, no, we're not leaving the room. That right there, to me at least, is Todoroki and the class of 1A acknowledging that they are done being on the outs of everything. They need to know everything as much as the police and the teachers need to know everything. And while we're talking about police, look at Tsukauchi right here. Man, the guy looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. He looks like somebody that probably wouldn't mind if a vigilante gave him a hand. I think that there's still room for us to have some hope that the vigilantes might appear, but let's kind of take our foot off the gas pedal a little bit bit and see if maybe it's coming down the pipeline, you know? Right when we always think that Horikoshi isn't gonna do something, he does something. And if I were to guess, Vigilantes probably has to end its run first for those characters to make their move on over to the main title. And we'll actually see next week on Christmas Eve whether or not Koichi survived the attack by number 6, but that's beside the point. We have to talk about chapter 338 because the possibility of that turning out to be pretty chaotic is likely. We might see a little bit more of All for One, but I got a feeling that after this chapter, we're gonna pivot more towards a planning type of chapter. We're not gonna get heavy exposition unless the new chapter pivots and just gives us a completely different point of view completely, which don't get me wrong, Horikoshi has done that before, but it tends to tie itself in a little bit later. I would see All for One falling for the betrayal, but not really reeling from it severely. In reality, All for One kind of showed us that if Aoyama turns out to not be a good asset, he really doesn't care. So it's more likely that, you know, this whole, you know, linchpin of him being the thing that possibly destroys All for One's plans, it's probably not likely. All for One is way too maniacal, so the kids at UA really need to think of a plan to try to take this one little insignificant incident that might set back All for One and turn it into a massive one. And also at the same time, they kind of need to make sure that they don't get their friend killed because, you know, he is a traitor. But yeah, let me know what you thought about chapter 337 and let me know what you think is going to happen in chapter 338. Personally, I do think that they're going to continue the Aoyama storyline for a little bit longer. Maybe we'll get a little bit more exposition about it, but I would say don't be surprised if they do pivot and you get a new point of view and they try to accelerate the plot line a little bit further. The past 3 chapters have kind of moved in a linear style that you were able to predict what was going to happen next, but now that this is all wrapping up, it's kind of curious to ask what might happen next. So let me know what you guys think. And on a personal note, I'm thinking about every single one of you during the holidays. I know sometimes the weather and the general feel of everything can sometimes bring out some of the worst depression in all of us. So if you're struggling with depression, don't feel weak that you need to speak to someone. Sometimes all we need is someone just to sit there with an open ear. That's why I have every single one of you. Thanks for coming to the bar, and I'll catch y'all later. Cheers.